Welcome, everyone. My name is Dana White. Welcome to the Myth Salon. Well, today we have Gita Morena, who is a great-granddaughter of the creator of the Wizard of Oz. What a privilege and what a story. In the Wizard of Oz, and in many parts of our lives, we deal with crossroads. We deal with taking this choice or that choice. I was talking with Gabe before the session today, and one of my crossroads is dealing with a path that is known or a path that is unknown. And which path are you going to take? How are you going to do it? How are you going to navigate that? And probably the quintessential poem for that was written by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then I took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden back. Oh, I kept the first one for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I should be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. It really resonates with the choices I made in my life. You often wonder whether the choices you made are the right ones. They certainly are the necessary ones, but I would like to have a moment of silence as we begin and invoke well-being for those who today are finding challenge in their lives, whether through COVID or politics or whatever it happens to be. And let's find a space for healing and for resolution. I'd like now to turn the Myth Salon over to my very good friend and colleague and partner in the Myth Salon, Dr. Will Linn. Will, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Gosh, what a special night. I'm so excited about it. And just by who all's here, it's so obvious that everybody's excited and people want to join and be part of this incredible conversation. To give a sense, first of all, Dana, I sang that as a song in high school. I love that poem. And to give you a sense of how important this story is to me, I'm in Mentone, Alabama, and I have created a kind of a fairy tale trail through the woods and down the cliffs and along the waterfalls where we are here. It's my yellow brick road. And I have in the special spot woven into the woods a tin can to be found. So I love this story. I love this book. I love this movie. I love the stories about this story and the outlines and the conversations that come from it. I've enjoyed talking with Nick Willing, who did Tin Man. And many of us have re-engaged this story, even through Chris Vogler's reminiscence of the story as he goes through the writer's journeys. So this is an incredible evening. I want to get out of the way of it as much as I can, so I'll get us started. You all know Dana White, the host of the Myth Salon, a producer, publisher, and a contributing member of Pacifica's Myth faculty. And by the way, this is totally going to be a yellow brick road of bios because of who this event has attracted. So I hope you'll enjoy the tornado. My name is Will Linn. I'm the founder of mythhouse.org, the general education department at Husson College, and these myth salons with Dana White, also a host for the ZDF series, The Greatest Myths in Humanity. Maria Tatar is a senior fellow at Harvard Society of Fellows and the John L. Loeb Research Professor of Germanic Languages and Literatures and Folklore and Mythology, Emerita. At Harvard, she served as Dean of the Humanities and Chair of the Committee on Degrees in Mythology and Folklore, author of numerous works on fairy tales and children's literature, including annotated African-American folk tales, edited with Henry Louis Gates, Jr., for which she received the 2018 NAACP award. Her newest book, Heroine of 1,001 Faces, is a conversation that we enjoyed very recently in a salon just in the last few months. Christopher Vogler has been the most influential teacher on myth to storytellers since he wrote The Writer's Journey. He worked as a story consultant in the departments of 20th Century Fox, Paramount, and Walt Disney, where he contributed to Aladdin and The Lion King after publishing his landmark work, he then developed stories for 101 Dalmatians, Fight Club, Courage Under Fire, Volcano, and The Thin Red Line. Dyane in Sherwood, PhD, did her analytic training at the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco. She's now president of the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago and editor and publisher of Analytical Psychology Press. She is the author of articles and book chapters on such diverse topics as the Lakota Vision Quest, the neurobiology of affect, the shamanic origins of Vasily, Kandinsky's paintings, and the chapter on training analysis in Murray Stein's book, Jungian Analysis. She is the co-author with Joseph Henderson, who did his personal analysis with Jung, of a book relating the alchemical paintings in the Splendor Solace, the process of transformation and analysis, which was the foundation of two myth salons we hosted very recently. Dara Marks, PhD, is a leading international script consultant with an expertise that focuses on the feminine heroic. Creative Screenwriting Magazine has consistently rated her among the top consultants in Hollywood, where she has spent the last 3 decades working with major studios and independent filmmakers, advising on film and television projects. She also offers workshops on her book, Inside Story, Power of the Transformational Arc, and leads retreats for women worldwide on the feminine heroic. She holds a PhD in mythological studies from Pacifica with an emphasis in depth psychology. Tad Crawford, the publisher of Allworth Press in New York City, is a graduate of Tufts University in economics and of Columbia Law School. He's the author of The Secret Life of Money and has lectured on the psychology, mythology, and symbolism of money at such venues as New York Open Center, Wainwright House, and Analytical Psychology Club of New York. He's the author of 2 novels, A Floating Life and The Money Mentor, A Tale of Finding Financial Freedom, and more than a dozen nonfiction books on the business lives of artists and writers. He lives in New York City. Gabe Gale is with us for the first time tonight, is an architect, artist, and author whose enchantment with the Oz books began in childhood. In 2017 and 2018, Simon & Schuster published 2 books in his 3-volume series, Ages of Oz, which launched his own conception of Oz history and world based on the characters and intentions of L. Frank Baum's original books. In 2021, Rizzoli published a book of his concept art for the Ages of Oz series. And finally tonight, our incredible guest, Gita Morena, is a Jungian psychotherapist and Buddhist practitioner whose focus is integrating spiritual practice into everyday life. With the given name of Dorothy, she embodies the beloved heroine created by her great-grandfather, L. Frank Baum. In her book, The Wisdom of Oz, Reflections of a Jungian Sandplay Psychotherapist, she sheds light on the Wizard of Oz as a tale of individuation and spiritual awakening. Thank you, Gita, for being with us. I cannot wait to go over the rainbow with you.
Well, you know, there's just lots of things we can say about the Wizard of Oz and the story. And I mean, I'm just so honored to be here with you all. And I really look forward to your comments and our conversation and sort of how the evening unfolds. It's quite a journey going into Oz with other people like this. So enjoy. I thought I'd start tonight by talking about my great-grandfather, by L. Frank Baum, and sort of what his original inspiration was for writing the story. And then start to look at some of the archetypal themes through the lens of the hero, or really the heroine's journey, because this is really about the feminine. So we'll talk about that. And then look at some of the differences. I know most of you are into the movie, but I always go back to the original writing and the original story and the original inspiration. So I'm gonna sort of look at how the movie shifted things and what the original story was really about from a more psychological perspective, because that's how I think about things. So some of the questions tonight to think about are, why has this story become so popular in the American psyche? It's amazing. You know, this book came out in 1900, so it's over 100 years old in terms of the story, and yet it's very alive and current today and has been throughout the whole century. So what is it about that? And what really is being communicated to us symbolically through the story in its use of imagery and its use of symbolism, and in the story, the way the story was just designed and inspired. So those are a couple of the questions that I thought we'd kind of touch on. So I thought I would start with just telling you a little bit about me. I was given the name Dorothy when I was born, and I was called Dorothy for 34 years until I received the name Gita from a spiritual teacher. So I remember when I was about 3 years old, my mother, we had all the original books in a locked cabinet. So I remember my mother unlocking the cabinet and pulling the wonderful Wizard of Oz book out and reading it to me. And I thought it was wonderful because it was all about me. It was all about Dorothy, and this was a book about me. And I said something to her about that, and she said, "Oh no, this is just a fairy tale. This is not about you. This is just a story." So that didn't make sense to my 3-year-old mind, but there it was. And then probably I was about 6 when we read the story again. And I think I was starting to read it to her now and commented on it being a story about me. And I was so excited. And she said, "Oh no, this isn't about you, but your great grandfather wrote the story." So then I knew for sure she was wrong. I just knew it was really going to be a story about me. And I used to think about the characters in Oz. I used to think about my friends as if they were different characters in Oz. It was like I lived kind of inside the fairy tale, if you will. My mother's name was Ozma. So I'll tell you about that in a minute when I get to that part of the story. But it was really, really hard then in a way for me to separate who I was different from Dorothy. It was like I was living this story, and it really became my journey, and has my whole life in a certain way. So let me do a screen share because I want to show pictures while I talk. So let me see if I can make this happen. So let me tell you just about L. Frank to begin. Should I play it? I should do it this way, huh? Is that better? So L. Frank Baum and his wife, Maud, had 4 sons. And their youngest son was Kenneth. And Kenneth was my grandfather. So in that picture in the center, Kenneth is the little boy down in the front. So what was fascinating to me is Kenneth used to hear, the boys would all hear their father tell stories to them about the Wizard of Oz, about the land of Oz. That's how the story began. And when Kenneth grew up, he found a woman named Dorothy, and he married her. And that was my grandmother. So my mother always said I was named after my grandmother. So I didn't have anything to do with the story, but I thought it was so interesting that he grew up, found Dorothy, and then when my mother got married and had a child, she named me Dorothy. My grandmother was pretty young when she died, so I never knew her. But it's so interesting to trace the energy of Dorothy through this family. So when Kenneth married Dorothy, you see the picture of them over on the left side of my screen. I don't know where it is for you. They gave birth to their first child, which was my mother, and they named her Frances. And they took her to meet his parents, to meet Kenneth's parents. And L. Frank said, "Oh no, her name is not Frances, her name is Ozma." And he gave her a locket with her name on it, already engraved with the name of Ozma. So that was my mother. And there's a picture of her with her locket. She wore that locket her whole life. And then she gave it to her granddaughter, her first granddaughter, when she was born. So really, I mean, this is a whole story of my relationship with Ozma and what that meant. And we did some traveling after my father died. She and I traveled, we explored all of the connections with the family and got involved with the Wizard of Oz Club. And we both have given talks to that club. She was really honored as the Princess of Oz, because in the second Oz book that L. Frank wrote, Ozma becomes the Princess of Oz and the ruler of Oz. And she was really the ruler of the family. I was more the curious, the adventuresome one, the one who, kind of like Dorothy, traveled out into the world and brought different adventures back home to her. So L. Frank was he was born in 1856, and he was the 7th of 9 children. His father was a barrel maker who developed a successful business in upstate New York. And Frank was homeschooled. So he was a creative, he was a child, he was curious, and his parents really supported his creative activities. And he started writing when he was a teenager. So when he was about 15, he went to town with his father and was fascinated with small printing presses. So his father bought one for him and his brother. And they wrote and printed neighborhood news in a pamphlet they called the Rose Lawn Home Journal. And then Frank got interested in stamp collecting. So he wrote about that. And then he got interested in raising fancy fowl. So he wrote about that, the Book of the Hamburgs. And then he wanted to be an actor. So he began to write screenplays. And although his parents were not really in favor of his acting, they invested in a small theater so he could produce his plays. And he wrote, produced, and acted in The Maid of Erin, which really did pretty well for a few years. In 1881, while Frank was working with Maid of Erin, his cousin introduced him to Maud Gage. And Maud Gage was the youngest daughter of a well-known suffragist, Matilda Jocelyn Gage. And Matilda had worked with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was a leader of the National Women's Suffrage Association, and she did a lot of the writing and thinking that really got that organization moving. She was fiery, independent, a strong woman. And at the end of her life, she published her own book called Woman, Church, and State. So I've gotten fascinated with Matilda and do a lot of really study now of her. I think her voice is really strong. There's a foundation for her in Fayetteville where she lived, and her voice is really coming out stronger. She whole story in and of itself. So Matilda wasn't very happy when her daughter wanted to marry this itinerant actor, and she had hoped Maud would become a lawyer and carry on her work with suffrage. But Maud insisted she was going to marry Frank, and Matilda blessed their marriage. And as the Baum's family grew, Matilda would often visit to help with the kids. And when she heard Frank entertain the children with his magical stories about the land of Oz, she and Maud were both adamant that he publish them. And I've often wondered if Baum was somehow inspired by the spirit of Matilda when he came up with the character of Dorothy. It's like the strong and determined energy of Dorothy was empowered by my great-great-grandmother, Matilda, and then channeled through her son-in-law, my great-grandfather. In a way, I think the spirit of Dorothy may have materialized in the concrete world in the form of my grandmother, Dorothy, and then moved more consciously into me, and that I've kind of embodied that energy and bringing Dorothy more into consciousness, thinking about the whole psychological underpinnings of this story and what it really means. So Maud and Frank started a family right away, and they struggled financially for a few years. And then they moved to Aberdeen, South Dakota, to join Maud's siblings who had already moved there, and hoping that they could be more prosperous. But really, things just got worse for them there. South Dakota was in a drought, work was scarce. There was rising hostility between the United States military and the indigenous people of the Lakota Nation. The retail store that Baum invested in, Baum's Bazaar, failed the first year that they were there. And then he took on being the editor of the Aberdeen Saturday Pioneer, which was a small local newspaper, mostly of boilerplate news. And then the massacre of Wounded Knee happened, not far from Aberdeen. And Frank wrote about it in his editorials. He praised Sitting Bull, but he described the survivors of his tribe as, quote, a pack of whining curs who lick the hand that smites them. And then he went on to say that, quote, whites, by law of conquest, are masters of the American continent, and that the frontier settlements will be secured by the total annihilation of the few remaining Indians. Yeah. So my cousin and I were shocked and appalled to see our great-grandfather's prejudice and blatant attitude of oppression and desire for the annihilation of an entire nation. Feeling the shame and the horror of his words, in 2008, we went to Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota as his descendants to bear witness to the horror of Frank's words. We felt it was important to acknowledge what our great-grandfather had said, to witness the pain and suffering these people had endured, to make a formal apology to the Lakota families who survived this massacre, and to take responsibility in our own small way for the shadow that festered in our own family. So that was a big trip. I mean, it makes me emotional to even think about it and talk about it, and to see this shadow that we're dealing with so much in our culture, much more openly now. But what he carried, and certainly the land of Oz is a land of diversity. This was a hard time in his life. He was scared, but he picked up and voiced a really horrible part of what we carry in this country. And it was really, the rest of the family wasn't too happy that we did this, but my cousin and I really felt like we needed to, and I'm really glad we did. So after Wounded Knee, the bombs moved to Chicago, and hoping to find more opportunities for work. And it was during this time that Frank really began to write, and to write his own stories. He was in his early 40s by now. And he really believed that men should be engaged with the children and the nurturing of the children and the raising of the children. And one of the things he loved to do was tell the kids fantasy stories. He made up fantasy stories, and that was sort of his bedtime routine with his own children. And the neighborhood children started finding out that he was telling these stories, and they wanted to come over and hear his bedtime stories. And pretty soon it was such a popular event that a constable would come by the house at 9 o'clock to take all the neighborhood children home. And this is really how The Wizard of Oz was born. The children wanted more stories about Oz, and Frank complied. And so The Wizard of Oz really arose in response to the children asking questions. And like most fairy tales, it really developed in the oral tradition of storytelling, which I think is really interesting when you think about how powerful it is and how it responds to what's going on in our culture in so many ways. When asked about his inspiration for the story, Baum said, "I was sitting in the hall telling the kids a story, and suddenly this one moved right in and took possession. It really seemed to write itself. I think that somehow the great author has a message to get across, and he was to use the instrument at hand. I happened to be that medium, and I believe the magic key was given to me to open the doors to sympathy and understanding, joy, peace, and happiness." And that's a sample of his handwriting. He was left-handed, and he wrote his stories out longhand. We had, when my mother died, she had one manuscript, and I looked at that manuscript and the published book, and there were a few words that were changed, but hardly any. It was amazing. I think about how I write with a computer and cross out and change and rearrange, and he just sat down and wrote, basically. In 1897, he published a book called Mother Goose in Prose. In 1898, he published a book of poetry called By the Candelabra's Glare. In 1899, he published a book, Father Goose, his book. And in 1900, he published 5 books: The Army Alphabet, The Navy Alphabet, The Art of Decorating Dry Goods, Windows, and Interiors, A New Wonderland, and The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which was a huge success when it came out. So the Baums were still quite poor. And that Christmas, Maud asked Frank to talk to the publisher and see if they could get paid an advance for the books that were sold, get some money for Christmas. So as the story goes, the publisher was happy to pay Frank, gave him a check, he folded it up, stuck it in his pocket, took it home without even looking at it. And when he got home, he gave it to Maud. Apparently she was ironing at the time. And the family story is she was so astounded with the amount that she forgot what she was doing and burned a hole in the shirt that she was pressing. It was a check for $2,700, which was really a lot of money at that time. So when I was writing The Wisdom of Oz, I was curious about Baum's inspiration. Where did he get the idea for this imagery that we know so well? And I thought the desolate flatlands of North Dakota, where Maud's sister lived, sounded like the way he described Kansas, that it's just flat and bare and dry and gray. And then this tornado that comes through and for Dorothy moves this house, but he wrote about a tornado. I went to Aberdeen and read the editorials. He didn't do much writing for adults, but I read all the editorials that he wrote in the newspaper there. And he describes how a tornado comes through the town and lifts the house up and drops it intact 2 miles away. And then he goes back to it about 6 weeks later and has to say it again. So you really get the feeling that he was quite impressed that this could happen. The Tin Woodman comes from, there was a period of time when he left Aberdeen before he went to Chicago, when he worked as a traveling salesman, and it's when he finally wrote that book about window decorating. He would see how people in their stores would just pile boxes in the windows. And he thought that people should be displaying their wares more creatively. So he took a tin pan and put a funnel on the top and made a face and made a tin can body and created a Tin Man in the stores for the retail stores. When he went to the Chicago's World's Fair, where he was hoping to get a job or be successful in Chicago, the whole facade of the fair was designed like a big edifice. Behind it was just like a fair, but had this big facade and resembles somehow his concept of the Emerald City, I think. And then the Scarecrow, there's a family story that he had a nightmare as a child that this scarecrow came to life and chased him. And so then we have this scarecrow coming to life in the land of Oz. He wrote 14 Oz stories in his life. He died in 1919. And then Ruth Plumley Thompson was hired by the publisher, Riley and Lee, to write 21 more Oz books. And of course, many people have written Oz stories now, including Gabe's Ages of Oz. So I think L. Frank would have been delighted with the inspiration that came from all of this. During his life, Baum published 41 children's stories. He authored them with 7 different pen names, so he wouldn't flood the market with his own name. So Edith Van Dyne was one of the names that he used. And at one point, there was a publisher in New York who wanted to meet Edith Van Dyne. So he and Maud dressed up, and Maud pretended she was Edith Van Dyne, and they had this meeting with the publisher, and he was relieved apparently when they weren't so interested in doing anything with him because he was actually Edith Van Dyne. He also wrote 83 short stories, over 200 poems, more than 42 theatrical scripts. He created his own radiolog productions of Oz. And in 1914, he started his own film manufacturing company called the Oz Film Manufacturing Company. As you know, there's references to Oz almost every day in the media now, with lots of books studying and referencing Oz in a number of ways. Of course, The Writer's Journey is just one of those, but we have Chris with us tonight, which is great. So, and you all know this, all the creative projects that have been inspired by The Wizard of Oz. Started with a Broadway musical in 1902 that ran for 11 years, The Wizard of Oz. Oz the Great and Powerful, Zardoz, The Wiz, Wicked, Disney's Return to Oz, and of course, the 1939 MGM movie that everybody knows so well. And there's an International Wizard of Oz Club, just like the Star Wars Trekkies and the Comic-Con fans. There's a whole community of Oz lovers who gather every year to share their associations, adventures, Oz connections. So I've been involved with that club for a lot of years. So has Gabe. Maybe some of you have. So much has happened in the world since 1900, when The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was first published. I think we're all a little bit lost and disoriented, like having landed in a strange and unusual land. It's like we've been orphaned on a strange planet and have to find our way through these unfamiliar and rapidly changing times. When faced externally with such widespread and dramatic upheaval, psyche struggles internally for understanding. And it often looks to literature and mythology for guidance, for clarification. Dorothy's journey really resonates with anyone who's been traumatized, anyone whose life's been uprooted by a tornado. I work as a Samplay therapist, and often the tornadoes used by clients to represent the pain and upheaval that's in their lives. The yellow brick road sometimes feels like it's been destroyed. Trauma makes everything feel topsy-turvy, upside down, confusing. So one of the ways to look at the Oz story, I'm going to move into talking about the story a little bit now. One of the ways to think about this is through the lens of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, or heroine, really, much more of a feminine journey, but I'll talk about that in a minute. The Wizard of Oz is the journey of an orphan, a courageous and curious child who's traumatized with the loss of her parents and carried by the tornado into a strange land and struggles to find her way home. So her journey really goes through the stages that Campbell describes in great detail as the hero's journey: the departure, the initiation of the journey itself, really, gathering your resources, overcoming obstacles, facing the wizard's test, going through a transformation, and then a return back to everyday reality. it's really a journey of transformation. And Campbell's the one who really recognized the common phases of this journey in stories from different cultures around the world. So tonight we're going to really look at Baum's original story the way it was written, not only as a hero's journey, but also as a journey of what Jung calls individuation. So from a Jungian's perspective, I think of Dorothy as a representation of ego, the representation of us, our consciousness. And I think of the scarecrow as really our sense of self-worth or our thinking function, what we believe about ourselves, how we perceive ourselves. The Tin Woman, of course, is looking for a heart, and he's been traumatized, so he's frozen. And trauma really does that to our feeling function. It freezes us. And then, of course, the Cowardly Lion is much more the sensate function, or the courage it takes to face whatever's going on in your life and to move forward with it. I think of Toto as being our intuition, maybe our soul that leads us into growth and development. Toto really is the reason Dorothy goes to Oz at all. She's trying to find Toto and save Toto from the tornado, and ends up getting carried up in the tornado. And maybe Glenda's more like our connection to benevolent spirits. And the Wicked Witch is our shadow, that part that we have to deal with that's more unpleasant for us. So there's a lot to talk about all of this, and we're not going to do that today, but it's a whole conversation to have, really. But I want to emphasize what really is unique, I think, about this story is that this is a story about a woman. This is a story about the feminine, about a girl. And this is, as opposed to the typical male heroes that we think about and write about with a hero's journey, that Dorothy really embodies the values of the feminine. She talks to the characters. She talks to the lion when he attacks Toto. She doesn't try to hurt the lion. She doesn't try to fight the lion. She has a conversation with him, and then she offers to help him. She talks to the wizard. She talks to the wizard when he's just a humbug, has a conversation with him. I'll tell you a little bit about what he says as they have that dialogue. She wants to resolve differences. She wants to understand what's going on. She wants to help people. She really is concerned about Aunt Em's feelings and what's going on back at home in Kansas. She listens to the stories of the characters that she meets. So she's not combative or aggressive really in any way. And then I think for women, it's really important to see that she stays focused on the goal. She stays focused on why she's in Oz and what she is really needs to do for herself without getting distracted about helping other people. But she keeps her heart open to new experiences, and she allows them to come along with her, and they really help each other in the end. So she's determined to get home. She's determined to stay connected with her family. People often say, well, why does she want to go back there? She was so unhappy there. But I think, again, that's a very feminine value, to stay connected with family. And of course, her presence is very grounding and very much about relating. She has to walk this yellow brick road step by step. She has to stay grounded with the earth. She can't just she can't just snap her fingers and get what she wants. She has to go through this process, and in the process relate to her friends. And I think that relationship quality, again, is very much a feminine value, a feminine way of approaching the journey for her. So often the departure of the hero's journey comes as a distressing or a traumatic event, a death, an illness, a divorce, or a big loss. And as the movie portrays so beautifully, takes us somewhere over the rainbow. That out of this loss, there's a possibility of something else that can come in. The rainbow is an addition, wonderful addition of the movie. Baum didn't write about a rainbow in his original story. So what I think is interesting in this story, in Baum's book, is that, you know, when Dorothy opens the door, that dramatic moment in the movie where it goes from black and white into color, is such an incredible moment. And the movie really emphasizes it so beautifully. But in the movie, Dorothy just starts wandering into Oz. She's just intrigued by it and she just walks out the door. But in the book, she hesitates. She pauses at that doorway and looks out the door and then is approached by the Good Witch of the North. And they have a conversation. And the Good Witch says, "Are you a good witch or a bad witch?" And of course, Dorothy's not a witch at all. So she answers that. And they begin a dialogue with each other. And Dorothy has to decide in that moment what she's going to do. She knows what she wants. The Good Witch says, you know, you have to make this journey. You have to get involved in the land of Oz. You'll have to go find the wizard. That's the only way you have the possibility of going home. But in that moment, you know, Dorothy could have just complained. She could have gone back to bed. She could have shut the door. She could have said, you know, I don't believe in witches. I'm not going there. She doesn't. She pauses. She makes a decision to engage. So the book really emphasizes, I think, the need for us to respond to this. We're given opportunities in life, but we have to stop and reflect on our response to that and decide how we're going to handle the situation when it comes to us. And Dorothy, who doesn't believe in witches and doesn't, you know, all of this is so new to her, decides to just engage, like you were saying, Dana, with the unknown. She goes forward into the unknown. So she really shows us how to accept unexpected and difficult situations without resistance, complaint, or argument. And it's with that response that she receives the power of the Wicked Witch's silver shoes. All of a sudden, they're on her feet and they're hers. And then the Good Witch kisses her on the forehead to protect her from harm, and she begins her journey. So think about it. When we stand alone after an earth-shattering or traumatic experience and accept the call to openly engage and explore whatever's going on, often it's like the universe somehow supports us and protects us with unexpected and synchronistic events. We get surprises that come to us very often. We had a whole Miss Salon last month about synchronistic events. And I thought about that as I was thinking about the Good Witch and her protection, her kiss of protection. And then we have to walk the path step by step. We walk it alone. And of course, in the book, the shoes are silver, and in the movie, they had to be red. One of the most forgivable differences, I think, between the book and the movie, because if they put the silver shoes on the yellow brick road, it just wouldn't have shown up very much. But those red shoes carry a vibrancy about life itself. You think of it alchemically, it's sort of coming into the rubedo, it's coming into the red phase, and Dorothy is moving into her life now. And then she moves into the phase of initiation, which I like to think about this as the gathering of resources. You know, as a therapist, when we first start working with someone, we look for what their strengths are. How are they gonna get through whatever the traumas and the difficulties and the struggles? And we have to know where their strengths are. So Dorothy gathers her strengths. She gathers her thinking function. She gathers her feeling function. She finds her courage. She rescues her intuition. Those are the things that she's going to need now as she moves forward on her journey. I like, as a feminine heroine, I like to think of these as her animus functions, and that she's connecting with them, and then she learns how to engage with them. She learns how to move forward as they face obstacles. And in the book, there's a number of obstacles that they have to face together and figure out how they're going to get past them. In the movie, very often it's kind of the good witch versus the bad witch battle. And Glenda often comes in to rescue. But in the book, that doesn't happen. You know, they come to a big ravine and they have to figure out how they're going to get across, and it's too big for them to jump. And the lion, who's kind of scared, says, well, maybe I can get you across there. You're light enough. I'll see if I can jump across. And he jumps across. And then they get chased by caladas, by these ferocious creatures with heads like tigers and bodies like bears. And then they come to a big cliff, and the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow put their heads together and say, okay, if we can chop down a tree, we can make a bridge, we can go across just in time. Then they get to a river. They have to figure out how to cross the river. The Scarecrow says, let's build a raft. I'll pull us across. He gets stuck on the pole. Again, we get stuck in our heads. They cruise down the river. Finally, a stork rescues the Scarecrow. And then, of course, the poppy fields. And they have to figure out how to get out of the poppy fields. And they get help with all the little, they build a ramp for the lion, and they get help from all the field mice who tie up strings to the ramp and wheel the lion out of the poppy field. So lots of obstacles to overcome. And then, of course, they go into the most scary place. They meet with the wizard. The wizard says, no, I can't really help you. You have to bring me the broomstick of the Wicked Witch. And in Campbell's language, they go into the innermost cave. So the MGM movie really portrays this very dramatically.
The last to go will see the first three go before her. And her mangy little dog, too. How about a little fire, Scarecrow? You cursed brat! Look what you've done! I'm melting! Melting! Oh, what a world! What a world! Who would have thought a good little girl like you could destroy my beautiful wickedness? Ah, look out! Look out! I'm going!
She's dead. You killed her.
I didn't mean to kill her. Really, I didn't. It's just that he was on fire.
Hail to Dorothy! The Wicked Witch is dead!
Hail! Hail to Dorothy! The Wicked Witch is dead!
The broom. May we have it?
Please, and take it with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Now we can go back to the wizard and tell him the Wicked Witch is dead.
So I love the scene. I know when I was a little girl and watched this and the witch melts, it was so, I wasn't sure she was really gone. You know, is she's magical? Is she just gonna pop back to life? We don't really know. And the way we really relax is when Toto goes up and wags his tail when he sniffs at the witch. And then everybody kind of, oh, she's really dead. So I think it's so interesting when you think about the role that Toto plays through this. And then did you notice, really, from the movie, how the witch was melted? Dorothy throws a pail of water onto the Scarecrow to put the fire out of the scarecrow. And accidentally, the witch melts. Accidentally, the water splatters onto the witch. But in the book, it's a really different situation. Dorothy is trapped in the wizard's castle, and she's forced to work for the for the witch. And the witch wants her shoes, and she's badgering Dorothy in any way she can to try to get Dorothy's shoes. And Dorothy's not having anything to do with it. And then the witch creates an invisible bar, and she trips Dorothy. And Dorothy falls, and her shoe falls off. And she gets so mad at the witch that she grabs a pail of water and she throws it right at the witch. And then, of course, the witch melts. And Dorothy is kind of horrified, just like in the movie, that she's a good girl and didn't know the witch was going to melt. But she has to get angry. She has to go down into her own psyche, into her own body and soul, and gets pissed off at this witch who has been badgering her. She has to really access her own shadow. Dorothy's a little good girl, she's trying to be good all the way through the movie, but the transformation happens when she gets connected with this dark side of herself and her anger and expresses it. And then, of course, everyone's happy, and they are going to go back to the wizard because Dorothy still thinks the wizard's her ticket home. She doesn't realize that anything's really changed, except that she's got the broomstick now and can go back. But when they go to follow the yellow brick road, there's no yellow brick road in the witch's territory. They get lost. They wander around for 3 days. They can't figure out how to get back to the wizard. And then Dorothy remembers that she grabbed a magic cap that the wicked witch had. And she pulls it out, and there's a magical incantation on the inside of the cap. And she says it, and the flying monkeys appear. And she's shocked. And the monkeys say, no need to worry. We serve whoever has the magic cap. And you get 3 wishes. So she says, can you take us back to the wizard? And they say, no problem. And they bow before her and take all of them back to the wizard. Sort of, for me, it's that instinctual energy that now is available to Dorothy. So they go back to the wizard, and Dorothy thinks the wizard's gonna be able to help her. But of course, he turns out to be a humbug. But he is able to see and acknowledge the travelers and what they've each done, and he shares his wisdom with them. To the scarecrow, he says, experience is the only thing that brings knowledge. And the longer you're on Earth, the more experience you are sure to get. And to the Tin Woodman, he says, I think you're wrong to want a heart. It makes most people unhappy. And the Tin Woodman replies, that must be a matter of opinion. For my part, I will bear all the unhappiness without a murmur if you will give me the heart. And then to the Lion, he says, all you need is confidence in yourself. There's no living thing that's not afraid when it faces danger. True courage is in facing danger when you are afraid. And that kind of courage you have in plenty. And then he tells Dorothy he's a balloonist from Omaha, and that a terrible storm blew him into the land of Oz, and he would repair his balloon and take Dorothy back to Kansas. So she's happy about that, but they fix the balloon, and when the time comes to leave, Toto jumps out of the basket. Dorothy runs off to get Toto, and the wizard, they've already let go of the rope, so the wizard takes off in the balloon and can't come down. And if she'd flown off in that balloon, it would have just been another Cinderella story. It would have been the feminine being rescued by the masculine. And that's not what this story's about. So Dorothy is not happy. She's really disappointed. She's really sad. Everybody got what they wanted except her. A feeling that all of us are familiar with, I think. And then she remembers she has this magic cap and she calls the flying monkeys, but they say their magic doesn't work outside of the land of Oz. And so then she talks to the guard of the Emerald City and he says, well, there's this another good witch, Glinda, who lives in the south. Maybe you want to go talk to her. So Dorothy begins the journey back, the return, by traveling down to Glinda. And it's another long journey. And there's more hardships that she has to overcome. And the last of them are these hammerheads who guard her castle. And whenever you get close, their heads boing out and push you away, and it's impossible to get to the castle. And I like to think of them as kind of our hard-headed beliefs and ideas that we hang on to. That's the last thing that we let go of when we really go through a transformation. But Dorothy remembers the flying monkeys. She calls on them. They fly Dorothy and her friends to Glinda. Glinda's been waiting for them. She sees them coming. And then she talks to Glinda. She realizes her power has been with her all along. And that wakes her up. Being in front of the goddess, being in front of the Great Mother, she sees herself, she realizes her power from what she's been through. She wakes up in Kansas. Of course, there's a new farmhouse and everything is changed because she's seeing through new eyes. I cringe every time I watch the movie and see the scene with her waking up in the bed and the adults around her patting her on the head saying, don't worry, it was just a dream, no problem, it was just a dream. And you know, I'm a big believer in dreams, but she's so dismissed for her experience. And she says, no, it's real. I know it's real. Don't know why that's there. So Dorothy goes, in subsequent Oz books that Baum wrote, she goes back and forth between Kansas and Oz. She makes many journeys back and forth and has adventures in Oz. I do a whole sort of presentation about those adventures because that gets really interesting to see what happens after The Wizard of Oz, the way he wrote it. And then what happens at one point, Dorothy's aunt and uncle say to her that the farm is being foreclosed, they've run out of money and they're going to have to move to the city and she's going to have to get a job. And Dorothy says, no way. In Oz, I'm a princess. I'm not going to move to the city. So she gets in touch with Ozma. They have a way now to communicate with each other. And Ozma says, no problem. She says, you can come live here in Oz with me and I'll bring your aunt and uncle and they can have a little farm outside of the Emerald City and we'll all live in the land of Oz. And so that's what happens, and Dorothy's adventures continue because there's always unknown territory in the land of Oz. So she really learns to move back and forth between these two realms. I think about it in psychological terms, it's like she's really, her ego now is really surrendered to herself. She's really able to live from that deeper place of her own wisdom and move in the world freely. So this is not a new story. This is an old story. It's told by spiritual teachings from around the world. The Christian's teaching is the kingdom of God is within. Home is within us. The Buddhist teaching, look within, thou art the Buddha. Siddha Yoga says God dwells within you as you. Hinduism says Atman, or the individual, and Brahman, the universal, are one. Islam says he who knows himself knows his Lord. Judaism, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Jung says the meaning of whole or wholeness is to make holy or heal. When I started putting all this together many years ago now, I synchronistically got someone sent me a magnet in the mail with a picture of Dorothy on it. And it said, all you need lies within you. So this is the story. It's a familiar story. And it's a story I think that we need to hear, especially now with all of the chaos that we're going through. Where is home? Where is our sense of connection? What do we need to pay attention to? Okay.
Gosh. Thank you, Gita. That's incredible. I was seeing it in the Q&A, and I think all of us chills after chills, because all of us know these details. We know these stories. And when you touch them the way that you do, and you go back and add this history, it's like revelation about our own childhood memories in a way that's incredible.
Okay.
So I'm excited to bring in the panelists as well. I've kept thinking as we went about every single one of you and why you're here and what y'all might have to say. I thought maybe we should start with Gabe, our resident Oz expert. And then after that, we'll all just jump in, and I think we'll be fine.
Sure. Gita, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you. We're all lucky to have had it. Thank you very much for that. I'm still processing it. I mean, it's so beautiful what you were saying. And I think that for me, the part that I identify most with sort of like how Hollywood has changed the original story, I would say is, I look at Oz the Great and Powerful also, which was this recent addition to the Oz lore. And I look at how there was all of these powerful women that were saved, quote unquote, saved by the wizard. And I think to myself, that's the exact opposite of what L. Frank wanted, you know? And so, so I mean, with me, with Ages of Oz, it was all about reversing that. It's about the powerful woman, and you know, in my stories, it's about Glinda and Glinda's mother and Glinda's grandmother, and how they reclaim the feminine. So yeah, I mean, that's all I want to share right now, which is just, I love that you focused on the difference between the book and the movie, and really the core of it is the same. But if Hollywood didn't try to change that last bit, it would have been much better, you know, that it's a dream. So yeah, it's not a dream. It's this journey that we all go on, that we need to go on. And I like how you say that it's renewed, and yeah, great presentation. Thank you.
You know, and I would say, to me, I keep thinking about that moment too, often when I read On Fairy Stories by Tolkien. And in that, he says, you know, how sad it is when a good fairy story is dismissed as just a dream. Yeah. And it takes the wind out of everything. And sometimes I wonder if he was thinking about The Wizard of Oz when he said that.
Could be.
Tad, see you ready to jump in. Would love to hear.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the things that I noticed in rereading the book is that, well, color is very important. And there's silver, and there's gold, and there's emerald or green. But at the beginning in Kansas, everything is gray. And I wondered whether you thought that was a prerequisite for the individuation journey to begin.
It's a good way to think about it. You know, that there's a certain, life is very flat in a way. We have our black and white ideas about things. We get a rigid idea about how life is and how it should go, and you know, how we think we're going to control it. And it really lacks the emotional component and the richness of color. So I hadn't thought about that before, but just, you know, hearing your comment makes me think about it that way, that we move into a whole land that really accesses our mind, body, and spirit, that it's not just our thinking function that can appear so flat at times. So that's a good point. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you. that when everything is gray, perhaps we create the condition for the cyclone to come and tornado to sweep us away.
Right. Good point. Yeah.
Well,
Because there's a fragileness in it, you know, it's like we're not, you know, anything can sort of disturb that. And it does. Yeah.
And the duality is when we get stuck in hyper dualistic black and white, we're probably needing some type of integration, some type of third thing. And I can't help but be thinking about what Chris writes about that, starting a story in this place. And, you know, I know better than to call on y'all because you might have your own thing that you want to go down. But Chris, I am curious if you had thoughts about that.
Yes. You know, where I was sort of flung by this tornado of wonderful insights is into the world creation aspect of it, because what that man did was to create a complete universe that we somehow believe in and live in and can go and work there as a kind of laboratory where we work things out. And I'm very interested to hear what you think, Gita, about the energy field that it creates, which reminds me of the sand tray idea, that, you know, there is a thing which kind of takes up your full vision. They're designed that way so that the child or the patient can really only see in there, just like you were inside a dream. So the Wizard of Oz provides for us this kind of field, you know, and just a couple of little notes. I love naming and how Baum picked a couple of very meaningful names. Dorothy means God's gift. It's the masculine form is Theodore, but it's really a Greek word that means God's gift. And Toto is wholeness. He's everything.
That's right.
You know? And I certainly share that feeling with you. That's something that jumped out to me when I first tried to analyze this thing, is that Toto is always ahead of the game. He's always leading the way. His instincts are perfect and natural. And all she has to do is follow him, and he will always accurately lead her to the right place. So back to the sand tray, I'm interested how that all ties into this. I love the how you had created a tornado. It looked like just a paper cut in a spiral, but
someone gave me that. Yeah,
that's brilliant. Yeah, that's cool.
It was great. And you know, Wizard of Oz imagery, I do, you know, I do a lot of work in the field of sound play, and the Oz imagery comes up a lot. I mean, I can track it in so many different ways. It's fascinating to see that. But, you know, I really appreciate what you're saying. It's like the story takes us into the inner world in a way that even for people who don't believe in the inner world, and, you know, I used to think everybody did, but of course people don't. But they feel it. They feel it in this story. They feel it in the movie. If they've only watched the movie, if you read the book, you really start to see there's an inner world and an outer world. And they're really different and they're related. And we travel back and forth between them. And we learn certain things in the inner world that we don't see in the same way in the outer world, but there's a relationship between them. So I like to think of this as, you know, it's not just the black and white, it's the expansion into a bigger universe. That's consciousness, that it really, just by your experience, you know, people in the Wizard of Oz world don't like to think too much about the meaning of the symbols. They don't like to talk too much about it because they want to stay in the experience of the feeling that comes up for them. And I respect that. It's like, that's fine. That's where they live. I, of course, like to go back and forth between the two worlds. I think it's fascinating, and probably you all do too. That's why we're talking together. But yeah, that the movie and the story carry that to people, whether they believe in it or not, they feel it. Yeah. And certainly with the sand, it comes up, you know, people come into my office, I have shelves of all these little miniatures, and they're carried into that inner world where words don't work very well in there. I mean, we can use some words, and we have to learn how to find words for it. But when you're in distress, when you're dealing with loss and grief, you can only say I'm sad so many times. I mean, you get to a point where there's nothing to say. But the imagery gives you a way to express it because it touches something else in your inner world that you can give expression to. And then you can see the relationship of what's going on. So it's really a powerful way to begin to access what's happening, especially in those nonverbal places. I mean, Will, you just did, 8 days of silence, but so the world of imagery gets activated when you're in that nonverbal place. And then you learn to put it into words. That's what wholeness wants to do, that. We want to talk about it, but that comes later.
And I've learned I'm not supposed to start putting into words anytime soon because of the risk of that.
That's
I see
right.
Dara, and I was really hoping Dara would want to jump in, especially around that topic of the inner work and the yes, please.
Gita, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation and just opened up so many things. And I just value it tremendously, and it really touched so many things that I've been thinking about and working on. And it's always just so great to hear it come in from another perspective too. So thank you. So I was thinking, and the reason I just jumped in is a comment you made about how it touches us in so many ways that we aren't even aware of. And of course, that's the value and great value of storytelling in general. But I, like so many people, was so tempered in my youth by the Wizard of Oz, and what is encoded so powerfully in this story is our ability to walk the road in life and to face challenges, and that there is another side and we can get to it. And I often refer to story as the human instruction manual. And that's the sort of basis of the manual, that it tells us we can face our challenges in life. And I was thinking about how it so resonates in a very prescient way what we are collectively facing in the world today. And we have, this is one group where I can talk about the both and, because so much of it is so horrifying. And yet, we really are battling shadow. And if you think about the value of the Wicked Witch in the Wizard of Oz, you take that out of the story and she has nothing that challenges her. She has nothing that helps her discover her own greater value, and I think the world really is at a crossroads where there is an evolution of consciousness towards interconnectedness and interrelatedness, but it's not a gift. We have to go and stand for it and fight for it and walk that road, and to remember that that we can, the only thing that will defeat us is stepping out of it. But ultimately it's shadow energy that can be that can and will be dispelled, with a bucket of water. But anyway, so these are just some of the thoughts that I've been having as we've been having the discussion here, that this, I think all great storytelling hits us on all those levels, but this story in particular is just so full of rich imagery that really takes up residence inside of us. And we need to get back to that and remember we can, this is surmountable. So thank you.
I think that's really part of why the story is still so alive, is that, first of all, it's the story about a woman. It's about a little girl, and really that she can face all of these things and look like she's gonna lose. She's gonna look like she's gonna be destroyed along the way, and she's successful. She finds her way home. And I think that's a message that we really are hungry for, not just for the hero getting his sword out, but for this little girl who is pretty innocent and vulnerable and figures out how to be successful and find her way back home to herself.
Can I add one more quick comment?
Please.
You know, when we talk about a little girl and we talk about the inner world, you know, Dorothy's bigger issue, I think, on many levels than facing that shadow energy was getting trapped in the Oz place. And, you know, what we seek in life is this balance between the outer world and the inner world, and taking the riches that we discover here back into the world again. And I think that's also a very potent part of this story, of her ability to really also never give up on that choices had to be made and fears had to be faced. And ultimately, she never lost contact with her need to be part of both worlds.
That's right. Exactly.
She also is brought along the path of her own resolution through generosity. Mm-hmm. And how she ultimately resolves it is by coming to the protection of the Scarecrow. And it wasn't her intent to do evil or harm to the Wicked Witch, but she had brought all of those people, all those characters along with her because she was a good person. Her goodness runs through and through. At the very beginning of the story, she's frustrated by her neighbor who is really out to not do good things to Toto. Well, it wasn't about her, it was about her feeling compassion and gratitude for Toto. And how do I resolve this? Which opens up the floodgates of her being able to go down this golden path, but all the time she's looking out for everybody else around her. And other than wanting to go home, there wasn't a self-centered thought in the whole story.
I think it's really important as a woman, because we tend to give ourselves away to helping other people so easily, and we forget to give to ourselves. And I think her story is so important because she does stay focused on what is important to her, and also is generous and helpful to her companions. And that out of that, they can relate to each other in a whole different way where they start to work together. So I totally agree with the generosity, but I think her ability to also stay focused with herself is a lesson that as women, we need to remember that, because we tend to forget it. We tend to give away too much.
I saw Maria's mute go off when you started naming some of these qualities. Maria?
Oh, well, Will, you talked about chills, feeling these chills, and I had the sense of that sparks were flying throughout your presentation. So a few quick random thoughts, and then I want to ask about the magic art of the great humbug. Has anybody mentioned that Dorothy's last name is Gale? The unruly child. Freud referred to children as having a seething cauldron of emotions and all of that. And I loved how you talked about living inside the fairy tale. And I immediately thought about Gregory Maguire. Yeah. And if you've ever heard him speak about Wicked and the genesis of it, you'll know that the idea was born through play with his siblings. I think he had 8 or 9 brothers and sisters, and they used to act out their own Wizard of Oz. So this kind of improvisation and play that is inspired by the book is wonderful. I also loved how you talked about the genesis of the story, the contact zone between adult and child, and the way it's a kind of collaboration that harks back to oral storytelling. And I thought here of, Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland were both written in conversation with children. There's a dark side to some of that too, and thank goodness there's not for The Wizard of Oz. But what I wanted to get to, and I think that this book is just sui generis, and I think Dorothy is also sui generis. There's no one else like her. And, my instinct as a critic is to try to fit her into patterns. But she's not one of my heroines because she's not really a storyteller. And sure, craft, curiosity, care, all those features of heroic behavior are part of her psyche. But what struck me in that chapter, The Magic Art of the Great Humbug, is that what Dorothy really learns is how to use language, the magic of language. That is, there may not be magic in the real world, in that flat world that she returns to, but she can be empowered, as the wizard is, by language. So what can the wizard do? He can fill the lion with courage. He can give, the scarecrow brand new brains. And what does he do for he makes a heart for the Tin Woodman. So I wondered if you could say something about that, because I think it's a book that really teaches children how to do things with words. And it's just deeply empowering in that way.
What I think is so beautiful with the wizard is that he really acknowledges what the characters have been doing. That it's okay to be afraid to the lion. We're all afraid when we face difficulties. That he really reflects back what they've been doing, but he puts it into words so that they can hear it and see themselves. So I think that's the wisdom of this humbug. He's not so powerful, he's not so magical. It's not emphasized so much in the movie because he sort of quickly gives them these accolades. But in the book, he speaks to them and helps them see themselves, and that we need that. We need to be reflected in order to recognize who we are. So, we search for it in all different ways, some quite neurotic and some quite helpful, but we need to be seen, and we need to hear someone acknowledge us. And that's what he does. And then he tries to help Dorothy, but he can't give Dorothy what Dorothy's really looking for. She's really looking for something in her own self that she has to find, and he can't give her that. But he can certainly acknowledge the goodness. He could have acknowledged her efforts, but he doesn't do that because that's not the story.
Speaking of the words, and I wanted to go back to Toto. Toto as the intuitive, the spirit guide, and Toto brings the nonverbal aspect to Oz. Toto is the only being in Oz that doesn't speak English, and therefore represents the intuitive and the importance of that reaching from one nonverbal region into the region of words, which is obviously what your great-grandfather was doing so beautifully.
Right. Thank you. That's great.
Dyane, alchemy was mentioned a few times, as well as a number of your other interests. I was hoping, are you ready to jump in with us?
I wanted to say something about what it's like to be with this group and an experience I had. So it's a little bit off the subject, but about 15 or 20 years ago, I was invited to give 3 analysts, a Kleinian, a Freudian, and myself, a Jungian, were invited to give talks in San Francisco on The Wizard of Oz from our points of view. It was amazing. And what was amazing, I knew these other analysts, but the Kleinian talked about how Dorothy's paranoid position, her part objects, and all this stuff. And I was thinking what a disturbed person this represents, so on. And I was thinking, what a different, more hopeful way of thinking of human beings. And thinking what you're talking about, Gita, I loved what you said and then emphasized about how she keeps her eyes on, she's got to go home. She has to find her home within herself to be whole. And how, and both inner and outer. And that there's that energy. And how important that is to emphasize that we have something in us, no matter how much we're flummoxed or turned upside down, that we do want to get home. And some people are not able to, but there is that drive in us. And that we tend to focus on that, and I think be more optimistic, which I think we need some way to now. And this is where film, I think, is so powerful, and this dialogue so powerful. We need ways to bring this into people's lives through film, mostly. I was just reading that that in the United States, that people between the ages of 16 and 74, that about half of them don't read above the 6th grade level. And that's appalling. I mean, the level of education in this country is just terrible, but people get they learn from the news on TV and talk radio, but from film. And I really hope that there'll be more films where there isn't a wizard or superpowers, but these are initiated. This is what Joseph Henderson called initiated heroes. They're ones who have suffered defeat, have suffered failure. And an initiation, you have to overcome something that your ego has not been able to deal with. And you have to be able to tolerate the suffering without collapsing into it. And Dorothy and Toto, they're such a wonderful representation of that. How could our good instincts lead us to some kind of better place in the world? And how can you filmmakers and storytellers not have it be quite so much on the heroic model of the hero rescuing everything, but a more feminine point of view, and that inclusiveness, the inclusiveness that's part of Dorothy's feminine point of view, that she doesn't reject these kind of sad creatures that want to come with her, or say, no, you're not a proper person. I couldn't be seen with you. I'm a girl from Kansas, and you're just whatever, That didn't happen.
Right.
And I think that's such a, I think it kind of redeems somewhat the later Frank from his earlier racism and terrible stuff, that he writes this inclusiveness. So those are my little random thoughts for tonight.
I've been thinking about that a little bit too, and the many of us are kind of steeped and initiated into archetypal psychology. And the question is there a relationship between a respect for inner diversity and a respect for diversity in our world? Yes. And if we that's what I want to believe. So with that, I'm also curious. One thing I don't remember from when I read the book is if that inner outer analog that we remember from the movie is there in the book with the characters who are then duplicated in the dream, right? No.
You don't get that in the book at all.
Well, now, how do you feel about that? Do you ever feel like some of the evolutions are properly deepening the archetypal essence? And if so, is that maybe an example?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I mean, it's just so to see her start to recognize the characters in Kansas that she saw in Oz. It's like that's the beginning of that bridging, you know. And we don't see where that goes. I mean, she just stays the little girl through all 14 books and there and on. I have a friend who keeps encouraging me to think about Dorothy when she grows up. You know, where does she go? How does she use this experience to relate to a grown-up world? And I think that's more of what you're talking about. It's like, how do we recognize these archetypal energies in our life and how do we relate to them? And how do they act in our own inner world and how do they behave in the outer world? And all about that relationship, which I haven't tried to go into that too far, but I play with it a little bit because it's interesting, you know. But yeah, I think that's a great addition of the movie. I think that Somewhere Over the Rainbow is a great addition of the movie. You know, there's no rainbow imagery in the book at all, and it's wonderful because, you know, the rainbow's used all over as a symbol of another possibility, another way to see things, a unique perspective into a fantasy world. It's a powerful image of, you know, success and the possibility of being free in some way. It's a bridge from the world to the divine. You know, it's a wonderful image with all of its colors.
One part of the book or the movie that really resonates for me is the importance of forming or operating in relation to the relations that are formed. So Dorothy goes and she forms a network, and she has the Scarecrow, and then she has the Tin Man, and then she has the Lion, but they form a community. And in that relationship, there is strength, and she validates that importance even as she throws the water on the Wicked Witch. The monkeys and the soldiers, I mean, they immediately resonate with her. They support her. She was, at first she thought she had, you know, taken out their leader, but not to be the case. And to me, it really validates how community is a dynamic. It forms. It informs all of the people who become part of it, and it drew everybody in and allowed everyone to find their place and their proper place in it.
Chris, Dyane, I saw you both want to jump in around the same time. Hopefully we've got a common thread we can pull on together here.
Yeah, I you know, took a look at this in my book, chapter by chapter, following the hero's journey, and found myself reading it, although it's I agree with this feeling you expressed, Gita, at the end of resentment that they try to impose on her, that this calming thing, that it's just a dream. There's quite a vigorous debate among storytellers about the way the movie ends.
Right.
But I did find myself reading it the way dreams are often interpreted, that every character in the dream is somehow a reflection of you, some part of you. And so the book and the movie become models of the divided self. And they invite us to ask questions about that of ourselves. Like, I'm not just one monolithic individual. There are parts of me. There's a part of me that's, you know, a reflection of my father, and part of my mother, influential people, the Wizard of Oz, Star Wars, you know, all these things are parts of me. And I think it's very interesting, the thread we were following here about the differences and how the movies edited things, because I've worked in development and I can well imagine the meetings they had and the rewrites they did to eliminate this or that We can't build a whole river and have the scarecrow hanging on a thing. That's too expensive, so that one's out. But these flying monkeys, that's worth it. We'll find the budget for that. I think one of the things that sticks out to me that they added in the movie is that the three sort of fooled characters, her companions, have to rise to an occasion to get her out of a jam. She's trapped by the witch, and there's a clock running. There's an hourglass very dramatically running out the time, and they have to become shamanic almost. They have to become shapeshifters. They have to battle the guards and take on their appearances in a kind of a shamanic way, and then go in and fight very bravely to help rescue her. But I found that very interesting, and just to kind of put this in a context, this is for me part of a stream of storytelling form that goes back at least as far as the Three Musketeers, where you had four characters, one young, innocent, kind of gullible person, and then these other three that represented the body and the spirit and a kind of a cynical leader, and all those cooked together to make one person. And then after Wizard of Oz, you find this same form being repeated in Star Wars for sure. We would not have Star Wars if not for the Wizard of Oz. That's flat out known in the both communities that a big debt is owed there, and even for Star Trek, that a character like Mr. Spock has a definite connection to the Tin Man, I think, in not having that emotional side. So I'm just fascinated by this whole field and wonderful stream that it has created, or that it's part of. It's fabulous.
There's a whole development in psychology called internal family systems.
Yes, yes.
So, that we have these different characters. I always think of Jean Boland's book, Goddesses in Everyone, or Heroes in Everyone, that we have these different energies in us, and they could be in conflict with each other. They have really different focuses. They have really different purposes, and they have to figure out how to get along, and how they're going to make space for each other. How do we deal with the diversity of our inner world? And most people, when they come into therapy, want to get rid of those parts they don't like. We're just going to shut them up. We're going to make them go away. Then I'll be okay. All of that, and we don't get to do that. We have to figure out how to integrate them and relate to them. And it's the same on the outside. We're very intolerant of diversity right now in our country, and how to get along with people who don't think the way we do. It's okay, they don't have to think the way we do, but we have this idea that everybody should follow what I know because I have the right way of doing things. And I think part of what we're confronting, even in this story, is how to relate to diversity, how to respect and value what different perspectives bring us in our inner world and in our outer world. And it's challenging. People resist it in all sorts of ways, and that's a lifelong struggle. But
yes, I find myself a little bit disappointed or unsatisfied in the book when they deal with some strange creatures that come at them. By one case, the Tin Woodman just whips out his axe and he cuts off 40 wolves' heads. And I participate in Disney's attempts to rehabilitate wolves. As in some Disney movies, they're horrible creatures only to be destroyed, and then later they develop personalities and become more evolved and more tolerated. So there's room for evolution in the original.
Absolutely. Well, and he comes out of the 1900s. You really see his limitation. Certainly going back and seeing what what he wrote about the Lakota people. I mean, there's this dark side, and it comes out in these ways. You know, it seeps in as it does. You know, and he wasn't so psychological. He was just really produced so much in his lifetime. He didn't think about all of this. That I think, evolutionary wise, we're thinking more. We're trying to make sense out of this and see what is the message that we want to communicate through our creativity, and how does that line up, and how do we include all these different aspects to send a message? What's the message we're sending? I think we're much more evolved in that way now, with like you were saying with Dyane, the films is such a powerful media to communicate. But you look at what's on the film world, some of it's just, you know, it's all about fighting and you know, killing people off. It's like, how do we communicate the messages that we want to carry in the film world?
Yes, and I want to back up something that Dana pointed out, that this story complex lives in a tradition of fairy tales where there is a very strong element that he brings out, which is being helpful. And when you confront other beings who are different from you, fairies or little men or little women or strange creatures along the way, often there'll be maybe two people, two brothers on the journey in a classic fairy tale. And one will dismiss the strange person and not want to share anything, but the smarter one or the wiser one, usually the younger one, is more compassionate and gives some little gift of food or some support. And it always pays off later. It always comes in, as it is with the mice in the book.
Right.
The mice appear twice, and the second time they volunteer to help out of gratitude because a favor was done to them. And I love that as a message. You know, in the little wonderful piece you read where he described how it came to him, you know, he touches some wonderful emotions at the end of that little speech, where he's trying to bring about something about joy or compassion. I forget the exact words.
Yeah, right. Joy, peace, love, understanding.
Yeah, right. And that's something that's being strongly put across by the classic fairy tale. This is an unusual fairy tale. It's much longer than most fairy tales, but it lives in that tradition.
And really an American fairy tale.
Yes.
You know, I mean, we are a land of immigrants. We push the edge. We're adventurers. We want to take it as far as we can. And here he is taking Dorothy, the American fairy tale, into the inner world in such a direct way.
You know, I lecture about this film in other countries, and sometimes it's hard to get across what it means to us.
Right.
And I try to say it has something to do with the Americans move more than other people do in other cultures. And you know, typically in Europe, you might live in the family might live in the same house for 400 years, as it was with my ancestors. But we move around a lot. And it's very interesting that as they end the movie with "There's no place like home," that's not original to the movie. That's planted very early. It's one of the few things that Dorothy says that's outside of just, we've got to go and we've got to get this and so forth. It's a little bit of philosophy that she has from home. She says very early in the book, "There's no place like home."
That's right. That's right.
And that's very American.
Very American.
Yeah.
I wanted to make one contrast between the movie and the book. In the scene you showed where the Scarecrow's arm catches on fire, Dorothy throws the water to be helpful and save him.
Right.
But in the book, the Wicked Witch of the West has taken one of her slippers and Dorothy wants it back and gets angry.
Right.
And in her servitude to the Wicked Witch of the West, she has been meek and she has done what she had to do. So suddenly she finds an aspect of herself which has not been visible before in the story, and which the film basically avoids.
Right. 1939, women didn't get mad. Wasn't allowed. Yeah.
I'd actually like to piggyback off of Tad's comment there, because I think that that was one of the things, Gita, that you said that is really helpful to me as a storyteller. It's that when I look at Baum's characters, I think about agency and a hero or a heroine having agency. And what you've done in this presentation is you've sort of made me realize that the agency is subtle. It's there. Like when you said that she gets to the door and she makes this choice, right? And so you went through the story, especially the thing that Tad just mentioned about getting angry. So in your presentation, you help us to realize that there is a lot of agency that these characters take, Dorothy specifically, but it's something that I didn't realize when I read Baum's books originally so many times, and I think it's because I wasn't looking at it as carefully as you did in this presentation. So I want to thank you for that. And then also like taking that agency and connecting it to the individuation process too, which I thought was fantastic. But yeah, now I want to look back at the Marvelous Land of Oz, which is Baum's second book, and look at Tip from the lens that you've brought into the picture here. Is let's just look very carefully at each one of Tip's decisions and see where the agency is in that, because it's there and it's subtle, and I feel like it's going to make me now I want to go through all Baum's books again and look at it with the lens that you gave.
Cool.
Gosh, with all these fairy tale tropes, I feel I have to jump in if we still have time. But the grateful animals, of course. And then when we're talking about Dorothy's anger, do you remember the Grimm's version of the Frog King? How does the frog get transformed back into a prince? The girl throws him against the wall. She's furious, she's angry. And think too of Gretel, who decides she's really angry about what's happening to her brother, and she shoves the witch into the oven. And I remember in the preface, Baum writes about how he does want to write the American fairy tale, and because the European fairy tales are way too violent. And then, of course, there's a lot of conflict and violence in these stories as well. I wanted, though, to ask, we've talked a lot about the ethics of this story. And could you just say a word about the aesthetics? Because I loved how you were talking about the rainbow. And when Dorothy enters Oz, there's a paragraph that is a stunning description of, the sights, the sounds, the aromas of this new land that she's entering. It is sort of cinematic, if I may say. And then, the poppy field, the episode in the poppy field, where I think something's going on, warning about the seductiveness of beauty, the lure of beauty, and how when you give into it, something can happen. So can you say a word about that?
Well, let's see what to say. The poppy field, as you were talking about that, Dorothy and, they want to take a shortcut. So they want to cut across the poppy field because they think they're going to get to the Emerald City quicker that way. So isn't that the allure of drugs or psychedelics or something, some magic's going to come and take me quickly where I want to go. And it doesn't work that way. It knocks you out. It takes you off course rather than quickly gets you there, because you can't do the fast track. You have to walk every step. So as they cut across the poppy field, of course, the breathing characters, the lion, Dorothy, and Toto, fall asleep. The scarecrow and the Tin Woodman aren't affected by it because they're not human. So they can carry Dorothy and Toto out, but they can't move the lion. Meanwhile, the Tin Woodman has seen a little field mouse that's being chased by a tiger. And he gets so upset seeing that, he gets his sword out. Here we go with violence in the Oz story, and chops and kills the tiger and saves the field mouse. So this little field mouse is so grateful that she's been saved. And she says, I will help you. Just call on me, whatever you need. So then the scarecrow and the Tin Women are trying to move this lion and can't budge him, because there's a part of us that gets very stuck, I think, in that colorful illusionary world. You know, it's samsara. It's like, oh, we can't find our way out. And it's the field mice. It's these little tiny characters. So the Tin Women says, I don't know how field mouse is going to help us, but she said to call, so I'll call on her. And he does. And she says, no problem. And she gathers all the field mice. And the field mice, she says, build us a ramp, which they do, and push the lion onto this ramp. And it's these little tiny characters working together in community that carry the energy to move out. And, you know, it's those niggly little things in life, I think, that irritate and bug us. And if we really pay attention to them, we can learn so much and wake up. But if we don't, we just stay asleep in that poppy field and keep repeating the cycle until something jolts us out of it. So yeah, I think, you know, I love the scene in the movie, actually, where, you know, the door opens and it's all in color. And Dorothy just is mesmerized. She just walks out in a dream. She doesn't make the choice. And that was sort of the point I wanted to make from the book, is she does operate with more agency, and she does have a choice to make. And she could have chosen to handle that moment in lots of ways. But the allure of going into the unknown and the colorful world of emotion and liveliness pulls her. And I think the poppy field does the same, but she let go of what was important. She sort of got lost and just tried to do a shortcut, which we try all the time, and usually those don't work. So I don't know if that quite addresses what you're asking, but yeah, those are my thoughts that came to mind with your comments.
You know, one thing that struck me was in the movie, the wizard takes the flying balloon and they are relying upon human ingenuity for the way home. But as you showed in the book, the monkeys are taking her back. And this reminded me of in the Ramayana, where the flying monkeys, Hanuman and the whole troop of monkeys, take Sita from Lanka back to Rama. And we have mixed relations with the interspecies world. David Abram talks about how humans have a sort of a privileged sense of humanity being above the natural world rather than on a par or equivalent to it. And I think that as this story was portrayed, it allowed all of the species, all of the various characters to find balance and their appropriate role for their resolution together to make this story unfold.
You just really lit off something that I think there's a lot of crossover in myth and psychedelics, and so fascinating that you can get close enough to see the Emerald City, but you're going to fall asleep before you get there. And it's actually a major trope in DMT for DMT users, the Emerald City, gargantuan, specifically for that particular drug. And I think it's very interesting that they might consider that, you know, that's an interesting little built-in thing. You might be able to see it like you do on all these DMT trips, all these people see in Emerald Cities, but do you get there?
And you get a taste of it when you see, but you don't get to really walk in the door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the allure. Like, oh, I can grab it. I'll get there.
And I can't help too, the mice thing, the little thing, and you literally use the word bug in so many fairy tales. This is why not to step on the ants.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And gosh, and I guess if I could sneak in one last other one, it is that throwing of the water on at the end out of that silver pail, going back to that silver shoe. Well, the moon is reflective, is reactive. And so she doesn't go run around with anger. That anger is in response.
Right.
Like Jesus's anger is in response.
Right.
It's a different type of anger than being angry.
That's right.
You see the lunar nature of her character, and not to reduce the lunar to the feminine, but there is something beautiful there in the silver shoes and the water.
She has righteousness on her side.
Mm.
Yes, that's true. It says somewhere in the text, the guard says that the power of good is stronger than the power of evil. I love that.
Well, Chris, on that note, and I would like to put a vote in for goodness. I'm really touched by everyone's good-natured participation continually in the myth salons that we do, how there is such a generosity of spirit in this community. I am just gratified by it. I would like to just do another moment of silence and then thank everyone for your participation today. This has been a beautiful myth salon. I will say, it's not the same as ringing the singing bowl as we were able to do in my home. It just doesn't come across on the internet, and for that I'm apologetic, but thank you everyone. Thank you Gita, Chris, Tad, Gabe, Dyane, Maria, and Dara, and of course my good buddy Will. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you all.
See you on one side of the rainbow or the other.
That's right.
Thank you.